Welcome to the Crystal Library, a pocket-sized portal into the magical, mysterious, and sometimes misunderstood world of crystals. I'm your host, Ashley, and each week I'll guide you as we explore one enchanting stone, its history, lore, healing properties, and one easy way to invite its magic into your everyday life. Whether you're crystal curious or deep in the woo, this is your space to learn, explore, and expand your connection to the mineral realm, one glittering gem at a time. So let's open the library and see which crystal wants to speak today. Hello, and welcome back. I am really excited because my headphones have not been communicating with my mic or my computer for the longest time, and I never took the time to sit down and figure out how to make it work. And so tonight I finally did, and now it's all working. And I'm feeling really proud of myself for figuring out this techie stuff. And I hope that this all records and sounds okay. So exciting. Yes, so here we are. It's as I am usually coming in hot from work on a Monday night, trying to get this recorded at the last minute. But I was up super early this morning, putting final touches on this episode, and now I'm ready to roll. I'm very excited. I'm always very excited. So let's just jump into it. For almost 200 years, this stone didn't have a name of its own. Miners called it calamine. So did doctors who used it to treat skin problems and burns. But calamine wasn't one mineral. It was two different minerals sitting in the same rock doing similar jobs, looking similar enough that nobody bothered to separate them. Then a chemist ran the tests nobody else had run and found the line that had been there the whole time, waiting for somebody to draw it. One mineral kept the old name. The other got a new one, named after the man who found the boundary. James Smithson. His fortune is the reason the Smithsonian Institute exists at all, and the mineral carrying his name turns out to be its own case study in what happens when something goes unclassified for centuries, mistaken for its neighbor, until someone finally insists on telling them apart. This is the Crystal Library. I'm Ashley, and I'm so happy you're here. Today, we are talking about Smithsonite, a stone defined by a boundary that took 200 years to draw, and, as we're about to find out, one that plenty of other systems still can't agree on. Let's get settled on the facts on the table first, because there aren't many of them. Smithsonite is zinc carbonate. It's soft, a 5 to 5.5 on the Mohs scale, which is part of why you rarely see it cut into jewelry. Collectors want it in its raw form or shaped into cabochons because that's where its real character shows up. It forms through a sedimentary process, zinc-rich water working its way through carbonate rock, often forming right alongside its old lookalike, hemimorphite. That pairing matters. We'll come back to it. You'll find it coming out of the ground in the United States, Mexico, Namibia, Greece, Italy, and Australia. No single country claims it as uniquely theirs, which tracks with everything else about this stone. Color-wise, Smithsonite might have the widest range of any carbonate material you'll find in a crystal shop. Pink, lavender, green, blue-green, yellow, brown, white, gray, blue. It shows up in almost every color a stone can show up in, which makes it one of the hardest crystals to identify on site alone. And even the parts of this stone that aren't supposed to be settled, or rather, I'm sorry, the parts of the stone that are, not aren't, are supposed to be settled, such as chakras, astrology, they aren't. Depending on which source you open, Smithsonite corresponds to the sacral chakra, the crown, the heart, or simply all of them. Its zodiac sign is usually Pisces, except when it's Pisces and Virgo. So even at the reference table level, before we get into anything else, this stone is already resisting a clean line. Here's where the boundary actually gets drawn. Long before anyone called this mineral Smithsonite, it didn't have its own identity at all. It was just calamine, a catch-all name for a rock that miners and doctors used interchangeably without knowing they were actually handling two different minerals. One of them was what we call Smithsonite now. The other name was hemimorphite. Different chemistry, different crystal structure, similar enough on the surface that for centuries nobody drew the line between them. And this wasn't a niche confusion. The Romans used calamine to make brass. During China's Tang Dynasty, it was being smelted for coins and ornaments. Through the Middle Ages, it was ground into medicine for skin conditions under the name lapis calaminaris. An entire economy and an entire medical tradition ran on this stone for over thousands of years while it was still technically unclassified. Nobody had bothered to ask whether calamine was actually one or two things. Then, in the early 1800s, a mineralogist named James Smithson did the work nobody else had done. He ran the tests. He found the boundary that had been sitting there the whole time, waiting to be drawn. Calamine split into two separate minerals, and the one we're talking about today got a new name, carrying his. Smithson's fortune built the Smithsonian, the network of museums and research centers in Washington, D.C., that houses the country's collections of natural history, art, and culture, and does the actual work of studying and classifying them. It's an institution built on sorting the world into categories. This bone belongs with these bones. This artifact is from this era and not that one. And it was funded by a man who just spent his career doing exactly that to a rock. Smithsonite's whole origin story is a threshold, not a metaphor for one, an actual documented case of something existing in an undifferentiated state until a line got drawn through it. So Smithson drew the scientific boundary, but that wasn't the last name this stone would get. Smithsonite also goes by bonamite, a trade name that has nothing to do with mineralogy and everything to do with marketing. It was coined by the Goodfriend brothers, who were jewelers in New York, for the apple green material they were cutting into cabochons and selling. The name is a pun. It comes from the French bon ami, meaning good friend, playing on their own last name, Goodfriend, while giving the stone a softer, more sellable identity than Smithsonite offered, right? Bonamite. So now there are two names circling the same object, and they come from two completely different worlds. One draws on a scientific boundary, this mineral, not that one, based on chemistry and crystal structure. The other draws a commercial boundary, this stone repackaged and renamed because bonamite moves product in a jewelry case in a way Smithsonite doesn't. Neither name is wrong. They're just answering different questions about where this stone's identity actually sits. Science asked, what is this structurally? Commerce asked, what will someone pay for it? And we haven't even gotten to what folklore and metaphysics asks yet, which is where things get messy. Here's where it gets interesting, because not everything about Smithsonite is contested. Across nearly every source in my personal library, one description keeps showing up in different words. Gentle, calming, soothing to grief, to distress, to a nervous system that's had too much. It's not one claim copied forward word for word. It's the same impression, phrased differently every time. That's worth taking seriously because it's different from what we're about to look at with the physical healing claims. When a description shows up independently phrased across multiple sources, that's at least a pattern worth noting. It doesn't prove the stone is doing anything, but it's not nothing either. It might say more about what a soft-colored, smooth, bubble-textured mineral tends to evoke in people holding it than about any property of the mineral itself. Correlation, not causation, still a real pattern, honestly observed. Then there's the part where even the settled categories can't agree. Smithsonite's zodiac correspondence is Pisces in most of my sources, but at least one adds Virgo alongside it. Two signs that don't typically share much territory, one water, one earth, one dissolving boundaries, one obsessed with precision and order, both claimed by the same stone, depending on which book you're holding. So, emotional resonance, converging without an explained reason why. Zodiac correspondence, splitting without an explanation either. Two different kinds of disagreement, sitting right next to each other on the same side of literature. What's coming next is a harder version of the same problem because the physical healing claims don't converge by chance. They converge by copying. Let's actually look at what's being claimed here because laid side by side, the pattern is hard to miss. Across my source library, Smithsonite is credited with balancing the endocrine system and regulating hormones, supporting a healthy metabolism and assisting with weight loss, promoting fertility, accelerating wound healing, specifically wounds related to diabetes, boosting the immune system, treating sinus disorders, digestive disorders, osteoporosis, alcoholism, restoring elasticity to veins and muscles, helping with skin conditions. That is a lot of very specific medical territory for one soft sedimentary zinc mineral to be covering. And here's what I can't find anywhere in these books, a mechanism. Not one source explains how holding or wearing a piece of Smithsonite would regulate a hormone or accelerate healing in a diabetic wound or treat osteoporosis. There's no study cited, no clinical observation described, no historical case referenced. The claims just appear, fully formed, oddly specific, and nearly identical in substance, even when the wording changes from book to book. So I want to be straightforward about this with you. I don't know where these claims originated. I looked. I couldn't trace a first source. What I can tell you is what usually happens with claims like this. One author writes something with confidence. A later author reads it and repeats it because it sounds plausible and nobody's contradicting it. And after enough repetitions across enough books, it stops reading like an unverified guess and starts reading like established fact. Nobody along the way necessarily meant to mislead anyone, but that's how a claim with no origin ends up sounding like settled knowledge. So I'm not going to tell you Smithsonite balances your hormones or heals diabetic wounds. I don't have a reason to believe that. And neither, as far as I can tell, does anyone who's written it down. There's one claim in my source library that deserves its own moment because it's doing something sneakier than the others. One source states that Smithsonite's zinc content supports the healthy expression of sexuality and romantic passion and channels sexual urges into what it calls appropriate avenues of expression. Notice what's happening in that sentence. It's not just asserting a metaphysical effect, it's reaching for a real, verifiable fact. Smithsonite genuinely is a zinc mineral. That part is true, and using that fact as if it explains the claim that follows. But it doesn't. Zinc is a real element with real biological roles. It matters for immune function, for wound healing, for a whole list of things your body actually needs it for. None of that happens because a rock containing zinc is sitting near you or in your pocket. Zinc carbonate locked inside a mineral lattice isn't bioavailable. Your body isn't absorbing it, metabolizing it, or doing anything with it, no matter how long you hold the stone. So what's actually happening in that sentence is a specific kind of move, borrowing the authority of a true scientific fact and attaching it to a claim that fact doesn't support. It sounds more credible than a plain metaphysical statement would because it's got real chemistry sitting right next to it, but the chemistry isn't doing any of the work the sentence is asking it to do. This is worth being able to spot because it shows up constantly in crystal literature and it's more persuasive than the plain unsupported claims we just looked at. A claim with no explanation at all is easy to be skeptical of. A claim wearing a lab coat is harder to question, even when the lab coat isn't attached to anything underneath it. If I'm going to give Smithsonite a tarot correspondence, it has to earn its place the way everything else in this episode has, structurally, not by vibe. And the card that matches this stone's actual story is the Judgment card. Judgment's traditional imagery shows figures rising up, called forward, restored from something unclear into something whole. It's a card about pieces of a life finally integrating into one coherent picture. Not sudden revelation, but everything that came before finally adding up. That's not a mood match to Smithsonite, that's its history, told a second time in a different language. For close to 2 centuries, this mineral sat inside calamine, indistinct from hemimorphite, unsorted, uncalled. Then someone ran the test, drew the line and named what had been there all along. Scattered pieces integrated into one clear identity. I'm not pulling Judgment onto this stone because it feels spiritually adjacent. I'm pulling it because the card's essential mechanism, fragments becoming whole, the unsorted becoming named, is the same mechanism that gave Smithsonite its identity in the first place. Judgment also traditionally calls for a decision made with intuition and intellect together, not one instead of the other. That's worth sitting alongside everything we've covered covered to today. Covered to today. What am I saying? Everything we've covered today, including the intellect of Smithson running his tests and the intuition every crystal worker brings when they pick up a stone and decide what it means to them. Both are real ways of knowing. Neither one replaces the other. If you're working with tarot alongside this stone, that's the question Judgment and Smithsonite are both asking you together. What in your life is still scattered, unintegrated, waiting for you to call it into one clear picture? I want to be straightforward with you about something. I've never worked with Smithsonite. I don't own a piece. Everything I know about the stone so far comes from research, not from a relationship with it. So if you've got a piece already, you're ahead of me. If you don't, we're standing in the same spot. And here's a way to actually work with this stone that isn't asking you to believe in anything you can't verify for yourself. Okay, so what you'll do is hold a piece of Smithsonite, or honestly, hold any object you're willing to designate for this, because I don't have a piece of this stone. A stone isn't required for this to work. What matters is that you've picked something and decided this is the object I use when I think about this one thing. Now, name one place in your life where a boundary hasn't been drawn yet. Something still living inside a calamine of its own, undifferentiated, unsorted, lumped in with something it's not quite the same as. Maybe it's a role you've never actually defined, even though you've been doing it for years. Maybe it's a relationship where the terms were never made explicit. Maybe it's an identity you're in the middle of becoming and you haven't said it out loud yet, what it actually is. Write one sentence naming that undrawn line. Not a plan to fix it, just the line itself, stated very plainly. Here's why this works, and it doesn't require anything metaphysical to be true. Focal objects change behavior by marking intention, not by transmitting energy. A lit candle marks a space for reflection. A closed door marks a boundary for privacy. Holding a specific object while you name a specific thing gives your attention somewhere to land consistently every time you pick it up again. That's a real mechanism. It's not just one most crystal books will tell you about. Smithsonite isn't drawing the boundary for you. It's just what's in your hand while you draw it yourself. And here's the actual point of this whole Crystal Library series. Every episode of the Crystal Library, you're going to hear me cut claims that don't hold up, flag the ones nobody can trace back to a source, and tell you honestly when I don't have a personal relationship with the stone we're covering. I'm not doing that to talk you out of working with crystals. I'm doing it because the alternative, inheriting a stack of unverified claims and repeating them because they're in a book isn't a real relationship with a stone. It's just borrowed language. A real connection to any stone doesn't come from memorizing what somebody else wrote about it. It comes from picking it up, noticing what you actually notice, and being honest with yourself about what's really happening versus what you're hoping is happening. Sometimes that lines up with what the books say. Sometimes it doesn't. And that's fine too. Your experience with a piece of Smithsonite doesn't need my permission or anyone else's to count as real. That's what the little ritual or the boundary inventory was actually for. Not a ritual you need this specific, if I could talk, stone to perform, but a demonstration of how meaning gets built with any object. Once you decide to build it yourself instead of borrowing someone else's. So if nothing in this episode landed for you the way I described it, if Smithsonite doesn't feel like a boundary stone when you hold it, that's not a failure on your part. That's the whole exercise working exactly as intended. Smithsonite spent 200 years unnamed, unsorted, mistaken for something it wasn't. And that's exactly what makes it worth holding onto. The boundary that matters most is the one you draw yourself, not the one you're waiting for someone else to hand you. Smithsonite has big crystal energy because the boundary that matters isn't the one in a book. It's the one you're finally willing to draw yourself. And with that, I hope you all have an amazing, wonderful day. I would love to see what Smithsonite any of you have or collect, because I think it is so stunning, so beautiful. I want a piece really, really bad, but I'm just waiting for that opportunity. Yes, I'm very interested if you have any yourself in your collection. Also, I recently changed my Instagram name to make it easier. It used to be mystical.mama.ash. Not anymore. It is now bigcrystalenergy.ash. I also have my Big Crystal Energy podcast Instagram, but I don't really post on there too much. I just really only have the attention span for one account, and I really never even post on TikTok. I'm struggling with social media significantly. I need help. I really need help. But yes, so that was my big announcement. I'm bigcrystalenergy.ash on Instagram and Threads. And did I change my name on TikTok already? I'm not sure if I did or not. But check it out. Check out my new website, bigcrystalenergy.com. What else can I plug? I think that's enough for one night. All right, you guys. Have a beautiful day. Bye. Thank you for visiting the Crystal Library. I hope today's stone offered just the magic you needed. If you loved this episode, share it with your favorite mystic and tag me on Instagram at mystical.mama.ash or at Big Crystal Energy Podcast. And if you're feeling generous, leave a 5-star rating and review. It helps this magic reach more curious souls. Until next time, keep your crystals close and your intuition closer.